The VLOOKUP, match, and index functions are great ways to do it. These functions work in any version of Excel on Windows or Mac, and they also work on the web in Google Sheets, and also in the web versions of Excel. With the VLOOKUP function, and the V stands for vertical, you have data arranged down columns. And by the way, there is also an HLOOKUP function where you have data arranged across rows. H is horizontal, and it works the exact same way as VLOOKUP, so there's really no need for me to cover that in this tutorial. You can grab actual data from a worksheet like you see here and use it in other sheets, whereas the match and index functions are really concerned with the positioning of data, where your data are located rather than what is the actual value of the data. If you want to follow along in this tutorial using your own workbook, go right ahead. If you'd like to use the sheet that I have here on screen, you can see it's called VLOOKUP example. You could download this from the Tuts Plus website right here on the page where you're watching this tutorial. And before we actually start clicking around and writing formulas, I want to give you a little bit of info on how VLOOKUP works. VLOOKUP links two different tables, and they could be on the same worksheet or more likely on different worksheets, even in different workbooks, using a unique identifier. And the unique identifier that we're going to use in this tutorial is going to be an order number, but in other situations it could be other things. You can think of it sort of like as a serial number. If you work with databases, you might be familiar with the concept of a primary key. So with this table in mind, let me explain how the syntax works. Like any function, we start off with an equal sign, and then you have the name of the function, VLOOKUP, and open a parenthesis. There are 3 required arguments and 1 optional argument. The first argument is what's called the lookup value, and that's that unique identifier that we were talking about. And in our example, that's going to be the order number. Now, because you have to have commas separating the arguments in any function, after you put in the lookup value, you type in a comma, and then the second argument is the table range. And in our example, that's going to be the entire table. But keep in mind, it doesn't always have to be that. Then we put in a comma, and the third argument is the column number. Now let's say we want to get the sale amount, and you can see here that's the last column in this table. In this instance, that's column number 8. Now, don't get that confused with the fact that you can see here it's column H. There's no law that says that the table has to start in column A. So let's say, for example, if we start the table in column B, then the sale column is still going to be the 8th column, but it's going to be in column I instead of column H. So that's why we're referring to the actual column number of the data table, not the column of the worksheet. Anyway, after you put in the column number, you put in a comma, and then that optional argument at the end is true or false. And this could be a little confusing. In this instance, we're going to say false, and what that means is this. False means don't give me an approximation, give me an exact amount. True means an approximation is okay. Now, there are times when an approximation is all right, but when we're looking at order numbers, and when we want to plug in an order number and find the sale amount of that order number, we really don't want an approximation. And then, of course, we close the function with a matching parentheses. One other thing. Because we're going to put this entire table in a formula, we need to make sure that we're referring to the table with an absolute reference, because we're going to put in the VLOOKUP function, and then we want to autofill down. That is, we want to copy and paste down the formula all the way down a couple of hundred rows. Understanding absolute references is beyond the scope of this tutorial, but suffice to say, it could be a little messy when you're using an absolute reference in a long formula. So what I find it's easier to do is to create a range name. When you give a name to a range, like to this whole table that we have, then you could use that name in your formulas. First, I'll show you how to create a range name in Excel, and it works the same way in Windows or Mac, and then I'll show you how to create a range name in Google Sheets. Now, the range itself, you have a choice. You can have it include the column headers, or you can have it be just the data below the column headers. Now, in the written version of this tutorial, I included the column headers, so just to be a little different this time, I'm going to include only the data and not the actual column headers. So what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to click over here on cell A5, so that's the first cell of actual data, and I want to select down and across to the last cell here. So in Windows, I'll press Control-Shift-End. If you're using a Mac, you want to press Command-Shift-End, and you see that selects all the way down and across. Remember what it is. I could always press the F3 key on the keyboard and get the paste name box and just double click it. And I'll type a comma, and then it asks me for the column index number. We said before, that's column 8. That's where the sales figure is. Put in a comma, and here it's even giving us a little syntax help. Do we want true or do we want false? We want an exact match. So you could type the word false, or you could double click it and it puts it in. Close a parenthesis, enter it, and it's 40. And in fact, if we go back here, source data, we can see, oh yes, indeed, that's correct. So let's go back here, and we want to autofill this. So click the cell, and if you're not all that familiar with autofilling, you notice that there's a little dot in the lower right corner of the cell. When you put the mouse pointer over the dot, the mouse pointer becomes have a range name that's for the entire table. Now we just want a range name for the data going down column A. So kind of like what we did before, you want to click on cell A5, press Control-Shift-Down arrow or Command-Shift-Down arrow on the Mac. Let's go up here, click inside the name box, and I'm going to call this order underscore number. Underscores are okay, dashes are not. So having these three functions that can look at a large worksheet and extract value and positioning of data are really great tools. This way you can have one sheet that has all of the data in the universe, and then individual sheets where you're picking up just those pieces of data that you need. And of all of the parts of Excel that people ask me about, VLOOKUP is far and away the most common. So I hope you found this tutorial helpful.